Hello, and welcome. In this video, we will be conducting a case analysis of a significant Supreme Court decision. The case is U.Y. Kiao Eng versus Nixon Lee, decided on January 15, 2010. By the end of this analysis, you will be able to: first, identify the key facts and background of the case. Second, determine the central legal issue. Third, understand the Supreme Court's ruling and the legal principles it applied. And fourth, explain the ratio decidendi, or the reason for the decision. This case provides an excellent opportunity to explore the nature of the writ of mandamus and its limitations. Let's begin by laying out the facts. Let's start with the facts and background of the case. This will give us the context we need to understand the legal dispute. The case involves a mother, U.Y. Kiao Eng, who is the petitioner, and her son, Nixon Lee, the respondent. The dispute arose after the death of Nixon Lee's father, who was U.Y. Kiao Eng's husband. The father passed away on June 22, 1992, leaving behind a holographic will. A holographic will is a will written entirely in the testator's own handwriting. It's a valid form of will in the Philippines. Nixon Lee alleged that his mother, U.Y. Kiao Eng, was in custody of the original holographic will. He claimed he had asked her to settle the estate and deliver his inheritance, but she refused without justification. So on May 28, 2001, Nixon Lee filed a petition for mandamus with damages against his mother in the Regional Trial Court of Manila. The purpose of this petition was to compel his mother to produce the will so that probate proceedings could be instituted. Probate is the legal process of proving a will is valid. In her answer, U.Y. Kiao Eng denied having custody of the original will. She claimed she didn't know its whereabouts. She also asserted that photocopies of the will had been given to Nixon and his siblings, and that Nixon had even used a copy as an exhibit in a separate case in Valenzuela City. The case proceeded to trial. After Nixon Lee presented his evidence, U.Y. Kiao Eng filed a demurrer to evidence. A demurrer to evidence is a motion to dismiss a case on the grounds that the plaintiff has failed to present sufficient evidence to prove their claim. In other words, U.Y. Kiao Eng argued that Nixon Lee hadn't proven she had the will. The Regional Trial Court initially denied the demurrer, but later granted it on reconsideration, dismissing the case. Aggrieved by this dismissal, Nixon Lee appealed to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals initially denied the appeal, agreeing with the RTC that mandamus was not the proper remedy. It stated that Nixon Lee had another adequate remedy under the rules of court. However, Nixon Lee moved for reconsideration. The Court of Appeals, in an amended decision, granted the motion. The CA reversed its earlier ruling, issued the writ of mandamus, and ordered U.Y. Kiao Eng to produce the will. It found that Nixon Lee had presented sufficient testimonial evidence to prove his mother had the will. Dissatisfied with this, U.Y. Kiao Eng filed a motion for reconsideration, which the CA denied. This left her with no other recourse but to appeal to the Supreme Court. Now that we have the facts, let's identify the core legal issue that the Supreme Court had to resolve. The main issue is whether a petition for mandamus is the proper legal remedy to compel a person to produce the original copy of a holographic will. In simpler terms, the question is, can a court order someone to hand over a will using a writ of mandamus? The Supreme Court's decision on this issue would clarify the scope and limitations of the writ of mandamus, especially in cases involving private disputes. To answer this question, the Supreme Court first had to define what mandamus is and when it can be used. It referred to Rule 65, Section 3 of the Rules of Court. This rule states that mandamus is a command from a court to a tribunal, corporation, board, officer, or person to perform an act which the law specifically enjoins as a duty resulting from an office, trust, or station. In other words, it's a legal tool to compel someone to do their job or perform a duty required by law. The court emphasized that mandamus is a public law remedy. It's used to enforce a public right and compel the performance of a public duty. This means it's generally not used to enforce private contractual obligations or private rights against an individual. The court also highlighted a crucial condition for issuing the writ. There must be no other plain, speedy, and adequate remedy in the ordinary course of law. This is known as the true last resort principle. If there's another way to get the relief you're seeking, you must use that other way first. Mandamus is only for cases where the usual legal procedures are powerless to help. Now let's look at the Supreme Court's reasoning, or ratio decidendi, for its decision. The court ruled that the remedy of mandamus could not be availed of by Nixon Lee. The primary reason was that there was another plain, speedy, and adequate remedy available to him in the ordinary course of law. The court pointed to Rule 76, Section 1 of the Rules of Court, which governs the allowance of wills. This rule states that any interested person can petition the court to have a will allowed, whether the will is in their possession or not, or even if it's lost or destroyed. This means Nixon Lee didn't need the original will to start the probate process. He could have filed a petition for probate using the photocopy he already had. The court also highlighted Rule 75, Sections 2 to 5, which provide a specific procedure for the production of a will. These rules state that a person who has custody of a will must deliver it to the court within 20 days of knowing the testator's death. If they neglect this duty without reasonable cause, they can be fined or even committed to prison until they deliver the will. So the rules of court already provide a clear and effective mechanism to compel the production of a will within the context of a probate proceeding. This makes mandamus unnecessary. Therefore, because a plain, speedy, and adequate remedy existed, the Supreme Court concluded that Nixon Lee lacked a cause of action for his petition for mandamus. Let's summarize the key legal principles that were applied in this case. First, the principle of the public character of mandamus. The court reiterated that mandamus is a public law remedy, not a private one. It's used to enforce public duties, not private rights or contractual obligations. This means you can't use it to settle a private dispute between two individuals, like a family disagreement over an inheritance, unless a public duty is involved. Second, the principle of the last resort. The court emphasized that mandamus will not lie if there is another plain, speedy, and adequate remedy available in the ordinary course of law. This is a fundamental rule. If the law provides a specific procedure to address a situation, you must follow that procedure. You can't jump straight to mandamus. Third, the principle of clear legal right and imperative duty. For mandamus to be issued, the petitioner must have a clear legal right to the thing demanded, and the respondent must have an imperative duty to perform the act required. In this case, while Nixon Lee had a right to have the will probated, the court found that the specific duty to produce the will was already covered by the rules of court, making mandamus redundant. Finally, let's conclude by summarizing the Supreme Court's decision. The Supreme Court granted the petition for review on certiorari filed by Kiao Eng. This means it sided with the mother. It reversed and set aside the amended decision and resolution of the Court of Appeals, which had issued the writ of mandamus. The Supreme Court reinstated the original order of the Regional Trial Court. As a result, Civil Case No. 011-00939, the petition for mandamus filed by Nixon Lee, was dismissed. In essence, the court ruled that while Nixon Lee had a right to seek the probate of his father's will, the specific remedy of mandamus was not the correct legal path to compel its production, as the rules of court already provided an adequate and specific procedure for that purpose. This case serves as a clear reminder of the strict requirements for the issuance of a writ of mandamus and the importance of choosing the proper legal remedy.